Got a bit of a weird question for you. What is the best way to play Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth? Is it A, in English, B, in Japanese with subtitles, or is it C, with anything except the English version? Well, what would you say if I told you the best way to play is in Japanese with any subtitle option except English?
Excuse me?
Like, if I was to go onto our channel right now and to make a guide on how to play these games, it would simply say the best guide to playing Final Fantasy VII and understanding the story is to not play in English.
What?
Now, you might be saying to yourself, what the heck is this guy talking about? Is he taking crazy pills right now? Surely the English is not that bad.
異物を持ち込んだのか。罰が必要だな。異物を持ち込んだのか。罰が必要だな。
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it kind of is. If you actually look into the Japanese script for both Remake and Rebirth, and heck, you know what? Let's go back to the OG as well. You will find not only a bunch of bad translations, but also localizations that enter into fan fiction territory. And before the keyboard warriors go into the comments to say I am nitpicking, by the end of this video, you will see just how much the English has changed things, thus causing the confusion that we've seen online, forums, and you name it when it comes to these games. Because, let's be honest, there is a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of it is related to one thing. Okay, so ask yourself this. Why does it seem that there are multiple versions of Final Fantasy VII story everywhere you look? Like, everywhere that you go and you see fans and players saying some characters are like this, and then another set of players saying that the characters are like this. Or how about story points or story beats? There seem to be story bits people argue about all the time. What about world building, lore, and more? Oh, and don't even get me started on theory videos. It's hard to believe it's been over 35 years and the Final Fantasy series has been capturing the minds of gamers even to this day. Whether it's some of the classics like Final Fantasy 2 and 5, or even recent games like Final Fantasy 16. However, probably one of the biggest games in the series is none other than Final Fantasy VII. Released back in, funny enough, 1997, Final Fantasy VII was not only the next-gen leap for the series, but captured so many people that it is talked about to this very day. Even the most casual Final Fantasy fan knows about 7, or at the very least the characters. Be it the crazy battle with Cloud and Sephiroth and Advent Children, the tough-looking but lovable father figure known as Barret, the beloved female leads of both Tifa and Aerith, and so much more. I mean, heck, these characters have made appearances in other games, be it cameos or full battles, and other sources of media like Final Fantasy Dissidia and Kingdom Hearts. In fact, it is so popular that the lore has been expanded upon over the almost 28 years that this has been going on, and fleshed out through things like books, special episodes, and even a movie. It is also part of the driving force for this 10-year remake project that's been going on. The purpose of said project is to dive deeper into the characters, expand the story, and clear up any confusion from the 90s, since they said they were limited by the technology at the time, and sometimes plots and story points that may have been confusing or left up to interpretation by the players that they feel that they need to set the record straight. However, there's one thing that 7 has not been able to escape ever since its release back in 97. I'm of course talking about the story. Or, more specifically, the multiple versions of the main story points and how some tell the story, or just simply talk about it. And what is the reason for this? Well, it's pretty simple actually. It's a combination of the translations and the localization in English. Let me ask you this. How would you react if you found out that a story that you have liked for so long was actually not what you thought it was? Like, you read the story, you watched the show or a movie as a kid, and you had your favorite character and you understood the plot while learning about the setting that it takes place in. Only years later to then find out that those characters are not who you thought they were, or parts of the setting were wrong, and when you finally learned what their actual real story was, you were pretty shocked because it's pretty different. It's nothing like you expected or made your story points were vastly different. Well, Final Fantasy VII unfortunately has fallen into that category since its original launch. Oh sure, we're a ragtag terrorist group, we're gonna travel across the planet and eventually defeat Sephiroth. Yeah, everyone knows that part of the story. But Final Fantasy VII is not known just for that simple path right there. A lot of it has to do with its character depth and a lot of the side stuff that is fleshed out through these character moments. Unfortunately, that has been hindered a lot due to the original translations and localization back in '97 and what is happening now with the remake project. Heck, we can trace this translation localization problem all the way back to simple TV shows back in the 90s, like Dragon Ball, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Digimon, and more. For example, did you know that in the English dub of Dragon Ball, the localizers decided to give Goku a kind of Superman-like persona? I mean, his little speech to Frieza on Namek after he goes Super Saiyan has him talking like, I'm gonna defend the weak, protect the universe, etc.
I am the hope of the universe. I am the answer to all living things that cry out for peace. Allied to good, nightmare to you.
When in reality, he simply said,
とっくにご存知なんだろう。俺は地球から貴様を倒すためにやってきたサイヤ人。スーパーサイヤ人復刻だ!
Now, luckily, over the years, some media has had the opportunity to go back and fix these mistakes. For example, we got the project Dragon Ball Kai. Not only did it fix the pacing issues seen in the original airing of the show, which was also due to the manga publication back then, but it also fixed the lines for the English voices, showing the viewer who these characters were.
You haven't figured it out yet. I'm the Saiyan who came all the way from Earth for the sole purpose of beating you. I am the Super Saiyan Son Goku!
Now, you might think this is some small stuff here and there and it doesn't really matter, which in a small bubble, you are correct for the most part. But in reality, this does matter. Because the more and more and more that we see this adding up over across, whether it's a game, a movie, or a TV show, it really does start to make a big difference. One word can either have different meanings depending on the context, or turns out that someone took a lot of creative liberties with the source material and made pretty big changes, resulting in some pretty significant differences. Chances are you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm looking at you, 90s Digimon. Now, why am I bringing up random anime shows and changes made when we are supposed to be talking about Final Fantasy VII, the whole topic of this video? Well, because the exact same thing happened to Final Fantasy VII back in '97, and with the remake project here positioned to fix these issues, we find ourselves going back in time as both Remake and Rebirth, the first two games of the trilogy, have not been as faithful to the original Japanese script, and the localization has made some pretty weird and honestly disrespectful changes. Sure, you can play with the Japanese voices, and if you happen to understand Japanese, then just ignore the English subtitles. Or if you're playing on PC, just install the accurate translations mod and boom, you're good to go. But that is a small minority of players who are not from Japan, or those who really like the English voices. Since the release of Remake, players and fans have been finding more and more inconsistencies with the English translations and its localization. And we know it's English because the subtitles for the other languages like German, French, Italian, and so on are much closer to the original Japanese script as you can be with proper localization. That being the key difference right here. FF7 is a story-driven game. It is not, let me repeat, it is not a choose-your-own story RPG. And yes, even though Part 1 has small dialogue moments, once a Northern Crater happens, those completely disappear. This is Cloud's story. This is Barrett, Tifa, and everyone else's story. We as the players do not get to choose this. There is a clear story to be told. Yet since '97, it can feel like players are talking about 2 to 3 different stories because, well, they kind of have. You want to know why there are even mods called accurate translations for both the OG Final Fantasy VII and the Remake/Rebirth games? Because players, like I mentioned beforehand, have discovered over time a lot of mistakes within the scripts. I mean, heck, something that has lasted over 28 years that people still talk about to this day is the fact that a lot of the fan base thinks Cloud was bullied by a particular kid in his hometown by not letting him play with them when you get to really learn about his backstory. When in reality, the actual Japanese script says that Cloud could simply not speak up to play. He was nervous, which, if you know who the real Cloud is kind of right in line with who he is as a character. Don't believe me? Well, let's take a look at the 97 lines right here and the actual Japanese scripts. Here's the original English that people still use to this day. And here is the Japanese. Now, I've put up both the Romaji and the Japanese here if you want to go ahead and read it, but basically the last little part to look at right here is ienekata, which literally translates to could not say. Cloud could not speak up and says he wanted to play with the other kids. This one line has caused so many people over almost 30 years to mischaracterize another character in the game as a bully, when it really came down to Cloud simply being shy. So, you see how one little line caused so much change in how fans and gamers viewed not only certain characters, but the story as a whole? Heck, you want another example? Here you go. How about when Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett are climbing the stairs of Shinra to save Aerith? Barrett makes a comment about wanting to see Marlene one more time just in case things go wrong. Tifa then comments in the original Japanese script saying, hey, don't say that, you're gonna jinx us. Yet the English was translated as Tifa saying, hey, stop acting like a retard and get climbing. So my question is, how do you go from this to this? So it is time to address this once and for all, because I've got a lot of examples and I've done a lot of research for this. This topic needs to be brought into the light for the general audience to see. Everyone that loves Final Fantasy deserves to get the full story. I want to go over some examples of different levels of both mistranslations and localization issues and show what has happened in the story. Then I want to show you, the viewer, what you can do to help make the team at Square aware of these issues in a civil way that is not yelling into the void that is social media, and of course not looking like a crazy person. Then finally, I want to have some last thoughts and a message to speak on at the very end. So if you enjoy this video or style of video, help us push it by liking the video, hyping it up if you happen to be over on the mobile app, and of course commenting and subbing to the channel. I'm Tallen with Direct Gaming. Let's get started.
Haven't seen him before. He your new boy toy?
He's my bodyguard, if you must know.
アリス。これが新しい友達か。
新しいって人聞きが悪い。
Now, right away before getting into any of my main points, I need to say this right now. Translating and turning a piece of entertainment from one language to another is not easy. It is a very thankless job, and one mistake can result in tons of backlash. So if anyone tries to use this video as an excuse to attack the team, dox someone, or anyone in general working on the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, then know that you are the problem. There are proper ways to get our voices heard no matter what side you may be on for any topic. Yelling and belittling someone does not help. It forces those working on things to close themselves off, thus resulting in less communication and does not address the issues. It's not one person who works on translations for a project this size. It is a team. So blindly blaming the whole team does nothing either. That being said, though, we can have constructive criticism, which is what we're going to be doing now. Anyone who knows me knows that I really dislike wrong translations for a multitude of reasons. Be it bad faith conversations, those who use Google Translate and say that they know the language and are experts on it, and so on. But one of my biggest sticking points is when words are removed or added that are not said at all in the original script of something, whether it's media or entertainment. And no, I'm not talking about adding in little words that like addressing other characters or story moments when the original language does not do that natively. For example, in Japanese, the words he and she are not generally said every time when addressing somebody. Or an even better example is the word you. Now, anyone who has studied even basic Japanese knows the word for you is anata. Yet in conversation, it's common to use either the person's name that you're talking to or to simply say your question or statements. It's assumed you know who someone is talking to when having a conversation. So again, no, adding in little words like that to make the English sound more natural is completely fine. Also, I'm not, let me repeat, not saying that every single line needs to be 100% accurate to the Japanese script. Some words and phrases do not work in other languages. That's just a reality. That's where localization comes in, which we'll get to in a minute. Sometimes it works well to change how a line is said for better flow and how the story can sound in another language. Where I get frustrated, though, is when we see things like this. Take this scene from Remake. Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett have snuck into Shinra to rescue Aerith. They need to find out where she is being held, so they sneak around a vent and hear where they are holding her. As they exit the vent, Barrett asks, how it went. Now, a small picky thing would be for him to say, how did it go, instead of anything? And they both basically have the same meaning. Barrett is asking what did they find out, and Cloud tells him. What changes is after Cloud tells them that they need to follow the scientist named Hojo. Barrett, in English, makes the most out of left field comment saying, cool, then we can kill the son of a bitch. When in Japanese, he is saying, cool, it went well then. It being the reconnaissance. Where in the world is killing the SOB coming from? I know Barrett can come off acting tough, but deep down he's a caring father and actually has a good heart. Do we just have to throw in swear words every other sentence when it comes to the English? It didn't come to Shinra to murder this scientist. Barrett always threatens, but notice his demands are always to admit they're wrong. This has to be one of the most out of left field changes I think I've ever seen, especially in the early days. The viewer/gamer is given the impression that Barrett is this no-nonsense murderer who is not even focused on the main objective, which is saving Aerith. This change was not needed and never should have been put in the script to begin with when the English recording was beginning. Another example of a smaller translation error would be between Rude and Reno. One of Reno's signature lines across this entire game and other media is Rudo Kakui, which literally translates to rude, you are cool. Now, obviously, this needs a couple things added on, but this is one of his iconic phrases that he says. This could easily be adapted to simply saying something like, looking good, Rude, or Rude, nice one.
Yeah, Rude, looking sharp.
Personally, I deal with the first one, but the second one is not a bad translation in my personal opinion either. Plus, it goes into localization that's simple and it works well. But no, instead, the English script was changed to have Reno saying, hey, get a room, will you? Why? There is no reason to change one of Reno's most recognizable lines. If he had said something else, then sure. But he didn't. The guy has been saying this for literal years. Even says it a few times in other media like Advent Children and Remake. So why change it to begin with? Another example is Tifa and her father in Chapter 1 during the flashback scene of Rebirth. The English says that she and her father ran to hide in the reactor. No, that didn't happen at all. The Japanese states that they were evacuating the town, and then her father decided to try and go talk to Sephiroth and went after him.
Dad and I had gone there to hide. When Sephiroth showed up, Dad decided that he was going to confront him.
私はパパと避難してたの。でもパパはセフィロスと話そうとして追いかけて。
This actually connects back to Traces of Two Paths, the book given a ton of character development to both Tifa and Aerith, which, by the way, is an amazing read. Go read it if you haven't. So again, I have to ask, though, why this big change? The English makes it sound like Sephiroth just found them hiding in the reactor and killed Tifa's father for some random reason. No, Tifa was helping her father, and her father decided to go after Sephiroth to confront him. I'll say this right now, and I'm going to bring it up a couple more times, but the more research I have done for this video, I have noticed it's almost like character moments are the main issue when it comes to being translated, which, side note, the directors and devs have stated multiple times that the project is to connect back to other sources created over the years, be it a callback, a line used in a previous game, media, book, or so on. Going back over into Barrett, since we mentioned him at the beginning, he probably has one of the biggest mistakes in Rebirth when it comes to the flashback of both him and dying. During the conversation with the townspeople that we saw in said flashback, before Shinra actually helps them, air quotes there, the English script has Barrett saying Marlene, aka Dine's daughter, which later becomes Barrett's adoptive daughter, when discussing if they should trust Shinra. However, this is important here, Marlene is not even born yet. Barrett, in this scene in Japanese, is actually talking about his wife and how he is thinking about her and the future that they are planning to make. This is a very big mistake because this is showing where Barrett starts from, and especially when you get into the flashback of Chapter 13 later on. This can hit even harder as it shows why Barrett becomes the guy that he is and how he feels about Shinra, especially with what happens to his wife. This just feels like a giant thing to overlook. Why in the world was Barrett's adoptive daughter, who was not even conceived at the time, talked about in this scene in English, yet in the Japanese, it's not even mentioned? Why was Barrett's own wife ignored? I guess Barrett's wife was just too Japanese for Western audiences. Hello, Future Tallen here real quick. Almost 2 years after the release of Rebirth, the game finally got a small update to have the changes say to give the kids a better future, which technically fixes the Marlene line, but this is still wrong. Why is the English again refusing to reference Barrett's own wife? This is the start of his character arc and shows us the path that he goes down, especially after we see chapter 13 and his own personal trial. It's honestly just lazy work and an insult since it changes the author's own work. I'll get into that later down the road. But anyway, back to the rest of the video. Going further on in Rebirth, how about Tifa and Bugenhagen? When they get to meet up in chapter 10, he tells Tifa she does not know what she is talking about regarding to hearing the weapons. You know, everything that happened up in chapter 9. Here in English, he comes off very dismissive and rude. In fact, a lot of people I saw online were commenting about this. Yet, in Japanese, he's not like this. He listens to Tifa and he comments about her connection to the planets. It's a much more polite conversation that we get to listen to, and we get to see exactly what type of character he is. I'll have more to say on this type of characterization in the other sections as well, as this is reflected more in the localization, but again, it's another change that is not needed. Hopefully you're starting to see the pattern here. Or how about the old famous line of changing fate? Oh boy, the word fate. The English loves to throw this word around like it's Christmas, especially with the word change attached to it. We can change our own fates, as if the characters are going to change or the story beats are going to be drastically different. Even though, again, since before Remake even launched, the devs have said that the story beats are the same, but expanded, especially parts that were limited due to the tech back in the 90s. However, as you might be guessing, when it comes to the Japanese script referring to fates, this is referring to saving the planets. You ever been in battle or in a side mission, you hear them say fate or something like that? Yeah, they're not talking about themselves. They're talking about the planets. The only person who really talks about fate and changing your own is Sephiroth. And who is he saying that to? Well, Cloud, of course, which is to get him to get up to the Northern Crater for the reunion. I've also seen a lot of comments and posts to this day still saying, but Sephiroth said so it must be true. Yeah, you know, Sephiroth, son of Genova, the bad guy. Going back on over to Rebirth, an example of a giant oversight that actually got changed 3 years after its release is Aerith's line at the end of the game when she mentions the sky. Oh god, Tallen, come on. Really? The sky? Talk about nitpicking. Well, here's where you're wrong on that. The reason that I am talking about a simple word is because of this right here. The proper line being said in Japanese says, Sora, kirai da na, which is Aerith saying, the sky, I hate it, or I hate the sky. The original English translation had her talking about the steel sky from Midgard for some reason, saying, I miss the steel sky. Now, thankfully it was changed, but my question is, how did this important line get changed so much? And again, for those of you asking, there's that much difference, is there? Well, remember how I mentioned referencing and making callbacks to other materials is a big part of this project? This line directly relates to Zack from Crisis Core, and other characters that Aerith has met throughout her life, actually. This is referring to how Aerith hates the sky that has taken people away from her that she loves, hence the word hate. The talk of the sky is heavily referenced in Crisis Core, and with Zack's role in both Rebirth and the upcoming Part 3 game, there was absolutely no need to change this. Again, luckily it did get fixed, but that's just one line right there. In fact, this leads into the mistake in Rebirth later on in a side mission with both Cloud and Tifa when they're looking up at the sky and Cloud says, don't hurt your neck. Yet the steel sky thing is brought back in the English for some reason. I'll say this again, steel is not mentioned in either parts in the Japanese script. Tifa then mentions she understands how Aerith feels referring to the sky, but again, it has nothing to do with Midgard or the steel sky that they have there. You know what? Speaking of Aerith, I also got to talk about this real quick. Some of her lines are really changed for no reason whatsoever. I noticed this not with only lines referencing Crisis Core, but just random ones in general. When she's with Cloud in Chapter 9 of Remake, she says the exact same line to him that she did to Zack when she first met him in Crisis Core. This makes sense since Cloud reminds her of her first love. Yet, someone felt the need to change this to, I'm not sick of you yet.
もっと一緒にいたいから。
俺ともっと一緒にいたいんだろ。
I'm sorry, is this preteen Aerith for some reason giving attitude? Again, this may seem like a very small change on the surface, but not only does it relate to Zack, who is a very important character, but it's making callbacks to the references used a lot in these games. And as you've probably seen throughout this entire section right now, this is really starting to add up, and it really is not keeping the story the same way. Again, why is it only the English making these changes? My only guess is that someone on the translating team either doesn't get it or they don't care at all. In fact, the more and more research I have done for this video and playing the games over and over again, I noticed that one person gets omitted a ton in these conversations, and that is Zack. Even though the devs had said he plays an important role, which he does in the Japanese script. But you wouldn't know that because every chance they get, they admit him. Let's look at one of the biggest ones right here. Aerith is talking to Tifa on the ship when they escape Junon. In English, it looks like a simple girls' talk. They want to have a conversation about boys, and then stop when the rest of the group finds them putting their conversation on hold. However, as you might have guessed, once again in Japanese, this is not the case. This is probably one of the biggest scenes for Tifa and Aerith's relationship. Aerith is telling Tifa about her past when she was 13. We know this because of the name dropped right before they talk about boys, aka the name Foz. Now, again, if you have not read Traces of Two Paths and say Aerith is your favorite character, you need to read this book. It was written by Nojima himself, you know, the writer of both OG Final Fantasy VII and the Remake project. To give you the spark notes of this particular moment right though, Faz is someone who almost takes advantage of Aerith and even almost kills her adoptive mother. Oh, and this moment takes place in her own church. Some time ago, Aerith and her adopted mother have an argument, and this is how Aerith first finds the church. Her birth mother told her about it, who was told about the church by the guy named Fez. Aerith ends up running into him while looking for said church, and he shows her the way. A scene that is not particularly T-rated, if you happen to know what I mean, happens where the guy almost has his way with Aerith, and luckily Aerith's mother does find them, but Fez almost knocks her out and tries to kill her. Aerith does try to protect her, but then she is saved by a Turk in the end. Again, spark notes. Go read the book if you haven't already. Returning to Rebirth, Aerith is finishing up talking about that experience and trusting Tifa with that story, which in turn brings them closer together. Again, another big character moment right here. Tifa offers her comfort, and Aerith is thankful for a close friend. She then brings up the topic of first loves, which is what the Japanese says, and it's an important part of her past since it was a good memory in the church after what just happened when she was 13 years old. But in English, they decide to just go with boys, like they're a couple of schoolgirls just talking about a random person they think is cute. Again, this is a reference to Zack because later on in chapter 9, Aerith bolts for his house when the group looks around the town. And to some who think that there's no difference between first love and boys, you might want to open up a dictionary. This, once again, is another callback that connects characters and story points, yet whether because it's Zack or relations in general, it was changed in English for random reasons we don't know. Again, I can only assume that they just flat out hate Zack for some reason, and I'm surprised they can get away with this personally. I'll come back to this later for characterization, but I want to go over one more error before moving on to the localization and, of course, the final section of this video. The final piece I want to bring up in this section is Sephiroth, actually. This one is probably the strangest to me. In English, Sephiroth is translated to speak pretty vaguely, whereas in the original Japanese script, the dude speaks very direct and is, again, very manipulating, like he's supposed to. Again, you know, Genova. What do I mean? Well, take a look at this here. This is chapter 1. Sephiroth appears in front of Cloud telling him, you know I killed Tifa. Then who is she? However, the Japanese script is a lot more direct, telling Cloud what he did. This one line right here is what I'm talking about. Now, for those of you who don't know, maktaku is a very direct way of saying seriously, as if someone is disappointed in you or you to them. Think of an adult scolding a kid, for example. He then says to not let his guard down, and this ends up resulting in the fight that we see on the roof with Cloud and Tifa. Yet, in English, he's kind of playing around with his words a bit and is trying to be like, I wonder who that is.
So, who is she? Or rather, what is she?
Now, some are going to say that this is a personal preference, but this is just the first chapter right here. It's supposed to be our introduction into just how manipulative Sephiroth is. Through the rest of the game, he's just as direct, spelling out exactly what he wants, and it's easier to see his manipulation. Heck, in chapters 5 and 9, the English seems to start adding in words like hate when it comes to Genova's 3 things she does to her enemies. However, repeat after me, the Japanese does not do that. He, and Cloud in chapter 9, only say love and fear. There's no hate. It's like, again, people are trying to add in as if he's trying to deceive on a bunch of different things. No, the main things are hate and love. Again, I sound like a broken record, but why is all this extra stuff added in? And again, you could also make the arguments, it's just one small thing, what's the matter? What have I been talking about for, I don't know, the last 20 minutes at this point in the video, assuming that the edits haven't taken much time up? Yeah, you're starting to see just how inconsistent the English script is to the Japanese when all the other languages do it just fine. Finally, when we get to chapter 14, and this is kind of a big one right here, when you're flying through the live stream, Sephiroth is really trying to convince Cloud to join him to make his perfect world, aka the reunion. However, there are some really weird translations here because we go from being inconsistent to actually somewhat decent translations back to inconsistency, and it flip-flops. Not sure if these were made to sound more confusing and mysterious, but in Japanese, he spells it out right there once again to be very direct to Cloud. Let's take this scene right here. The start of the live stream scene. He says, "This is the world's form." Yet in English, he decides to go more cryptic, saying, "True nature of reality." This is where multiverse fans love to point to say, see, Sephiroth said so. Again, Sephiroth, the bad guy. First off, are we really agreeing with the bad guy of this game? Second, why is English trying to change words into reality when Sephiroth is directly telling Cloud about the world of Gaia? You know, the one world that we are on right now. Then, right after that, the next line, like I mentioned beforehand, is actually translated fairly well. He talks about the walls of fate breaking and a quote-unquote new world being born, but then we go back and forth between lines that are not correctly translated and then correctly translated. Like right here, these worlds simply return to the planets, but in English, he's going on about homecomings, awaiting them, followed by the English then saying, and in the planet's embrace, all life is as one. Again, what's with the cryptic spelling out here, Sephiroth? At least in the English. In Japanese, he's very direct right there. The last bit at the end, he brings up the future being bright after saying, forget the past, and finally brings up the reunion. Yet once again, in Japanese, he brings up the reunion over and over and just beats Cloud over the head with it to get his point across. Remember, the dude's in his head. We all know it. Well, you should hopefully know what happened to Cloud back in the day. It especially makes sense if you've played the original and know where part 3 is going to be going. The final translation error, which kind of goes to my point of saying, oh, one or two words can't make that much of a difference. Oh, just wait for this one. Final translation right here is when Cloud returns from the dream world and Sephiroth says, poor form, after noting the white materia that he sees in Cloud's hand. This is nowhere near what he says in Japanese. He tells Cloud that Cloud needs to be punished, which just so happens right before chapter 14 and the end. What happens in chapter 14? I'm not sure why the English felt the need to be this cryptic and honestly just so inconsistent. But I hear some of you, again, type into the comments, isn't this generally the same thing? And to that I say, no, not even close. If this was a couple of scenes, fine. But I've now shown you probably over 20 minutes of wrong translations, mistranslations, and just wrong lines in general when it comes to the script going from Japanese to English. And again, I have to ask, why is it only English? French, German, Italian, and so on. They all translated it pretty close to the original Japanese script, obviously with their localization to help as well. Why is English just a big change? It is so inconsistent. And to prove this, now it's finally time to go over into the localization, as this Sephiroth section is the perfect stepping stone for that, and to explain why even small changes make a huge difference.
We can't waste any more time here.
What was that about?
Nothing you need to worry about. Let's get going.
早く7番街に帰らないと。
ティファ、平気か？
さあ、行こう。
Because we saw them with our own eyes. 2 in the Corral and Gungaga reactors. They were loud and huge.
A fascinating account, were it true. However, such grand delusions could be a sign of Mako poisoning. Do see a doctor.
Excuse me? I mean, what if it doesn't? What if it just returns to the live stream in a different form? Is that possible?
A novel theory. suggestive of a lack of understanding. However, that can be overcome with time and education.
私たちウェポンを見たんです。ゴンガガとコレルの魔航路で、すごく大きくて。
ほうほうほう、それは興味深い話じゃのう。が、魔法中毒の症状は様々じゃ。気をつけるのじゃよ。
え？そうではなくて、ライフストリームに帰って何か別のものになるということはありませんか？
親切？いや、親切じゃな。お主はセミナーに参加した方が良さそうじゃの。
Taking a break from translations, I want to get into a section about localization. Now, the basic definition of localization is the process of adapting content to a specific local or target markets. This could be something as simple as getting the content into another language, be that language, technical language, etc., but also includes cultural adaptation and language adaptation. For example, if one language adds words before certain sentences or phrases, then you can add those. Or maybe one language does not have a certain phrase or something like an onomatopoeia. Those need to be changed as well. A great example of this when it comes to Japanese is when certain characters are added at the end of a sentence, like, for example, ne. Now, ne cannot really be translated. Most particles at the end of a sentence can't. You might have heard someone at the end of a sentence use ne or yo. When it comes to ne, its most common use is to seek agreement with someone / the person you are talking to. For example, if I'm talking to someone and they say, Kyo samui desu ne, they are saying, it's cold today, isn't it? This is different than if we use another character like yo. Yo, it uses a more direct statement / trying to tell the person you are talking to be aware of something. An example of this, I could say, Kyo ame da yo, to my friend who is about to leave. However, I noticed that they are not bringing an umbrella or a raincoat, so I use yo to be like, hey, there is rain today. Almost like a reminder, but also hinting at them, hey, there's rain today. Might want to bring an umbrella. So when it comes to translating, we can't translate ne or yo, so we can add a little to the English to make it flow more natural, aka localization. This is also where localization can play a part when done well. If I was to localize the basic sentence above that we talked about beforehand, I would probably make it say something like, wow, it's so cold today, or hey, it's going to rain today. Might want to bring a coat with you. Again, either ones can work, and depending on the situation, one might work over the other, but overall, both get the same message across. Now, why did I go through an entire explanation of this? Well, because this is all about the localization, and if not done correctly, as we've seen over years and years, characters can get mischaracterized, scenes play out differently, and so on. An example of this in Final Fantasy VII, going back to the original topic of this whole video, that I know a lot of you have probably heard, was in the train graveyard scene in Chapter 11 of Remake. Near the end of Chapter 11, we see an example of localization actually hurting the characterization of Cloud. When we get to the end of the level and we see the ghost of Marlene, Tifa says we need to get back to Sector 7, in both Japanese and English. This is perfectly fine. However, it's Cloud's line here to her that is very different. In English, he says, what was that about?
What was that about?
He sounds dismissive and kind of gives off a what the F attitude. However, in Japanese, he says, Tifa, Ekika,
Tifa. Ekika.
Showing concern for Tifa with what they just saw and is worried about her. Now, I do want to say this right now. I am not blaming the voice actors for these lines at all. Voice actors are given the script and the lines that they need to say. It is not their job to translate from Japanese to English. So again, I ask, why is the English not only changing lines and certain words within the script, but changing the character moments as well? By giving Cloud's voice actor one simple different line, it changes how the player sees the character of Cloud. We know Cloud doesn't act like this, yet for some reason the English is like, yeah, nah, he has to act like this for some reason. Not really sure why. We also know that Cloud cares a lot about all of his friends, but especially Tifa. She is sad and stressed when she sees the ghost that looks like Marlene and is worried about Sector 7, hence the next chapter we go into and the events that play after that. Cloud easily sees it on her face and checks with her. So again, I ask, and I probably sound like a broken record, why make this change? It makes zero sense, and again, it is out of character for Cloud. And this is far from the only time localization has changed a character's personality. Heck, go back to the senior building example I talked about beforehand at the very beginning, and that's another example of localization framing Barrett as someone that he's clearly not. Sounds can also be different when it comes to going from Japanese to English. For example, simple ones like animal sounds in Japanese are very different from English, like a dog barking. In English, most learn woof woof, but in Japanese it's actually wan wan. This is because the Japanese for dog is either A, inu, or wanchan. Inu being a more regular word, where wanchan is more like saying doggy, usually used for cute dogs and small ones. Though, after living here for 11 years, I can say that both are used equally when speaking. It really just comes down to who you're talking to. The reason I bring this up, though, is because there are phrases said in Japanese that don't really translate to English or have different meanings. One of the scenes here was Zack and Marlene, where they say "hue hue."
そうか。それはヒューヒューだね。
ヒューヒュー。
Now, in Japanese, this refers to teasing somebody. Zack asks Marlene if Aerith likes Cloud, and she says "kitto ne," saying she's sure of it. Zack then says "hue hue" as a way of teasing two people, but shows he's hurt. Marlene simply mimics him in the Japanese script and in the Japanese voices. Yet in English, it's changed to Marlene kind of belittling Zack, going, "Yeah, it's because you weren't there." Again, why this change? Just to throw salt on the wound that he can't help the person he loves? Honestly, I could chalk this up to poor localization, but I think the better answer is just simply a lot of people on the English team just don't like Zack. In fact, sorry, got to go on a bit of a tangent here. Why does the localization team hate Zack? At almost every moment that there is a callback to him, a line that he has in the past, and more, the localization has replaced those lines with something else. Aerith telling Cloud she still wants to spend time with him when he leaves her house, first love change in the discussion with Tifa and Rebirth, Cloud calling Zack a loser, never actually says that in Japanese, by the way, and all the countless time Aerith has actually made callbacks to what Zack said to her in Crisis Core. You can't erase Zack from the story just because you don't like him. Heck, even simple character cards released in guides and other media, Zack gets omitted a lot. Not sure who's in charge of the Zack scenes, but they really need to get their act together and be more professional. This is not your story to change. You can't erase a character just because you don't like him. Sorry, had to get off my chest. I'm gonna have some other personal thoughts later on, but I needed to say this point because we mentioned Zack. Some other changes that come with localization is how certain words and phrases can be emphasized when spoken. Take the conversation with Cloud and Sephiroth. Well, technically Jenova/Sephiroth trying to mess with Cloud's mind all the way back in Chapter 1. This is a moment where I feel localization and translations of the lines made Sephiroth sound like someone who talks in riddles, where in reality, he's actually a lot more direct. Remember how I said Sephiroth is scolding him like a kid for doing something wrong? This is an example where tone is changed, showing the audience who plays in Japanese one version of the character, while another version of the same character is shown for those who play in English. And this is throughout both games, by the way. You can close your eyes and simply listen to both Japanese and English to see what I mean. Check out these examples.
全く油断も隙もないな。Or rather, what is she?
Tifa. What was that about?
The final example of localization is how characters speak. If you change something just because, you can take away from how the character's personality might be perceived by the players. An example of this can be Aerith speaking right here.
でも大丈夫。凄腕のボディーガードいるから。ね。
So let me ask this real quick. Why did someone feel the need to change and add this simple little word called mine, when in reality, it's not there in the Japanese script? Aerith is confirming to Tifa, who is scared of ghosts, that they have a bodyguard. Simple, easy, confirms for her new friend. But someone decides, you know what? Let's just throw a little drama in here for Aerith in English by saying that the bodyguard that is Cloud is hers. Why are you adding drama in a place that's not needed? I'm all for having drama when it needs to be there, but it's not even there at all. And again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. The English version is the only one changing things, while the other languages keep to the original Japanese scripts. Why is it only the English? I just want to know. It's a very simple question to ask. Why the English only? Come on.
クラウドだよな。クラウド。大丈夫。同期のクラウドだよ。よかった。生きてたんだな。心配してたんだ。死んだって噂があったから。で、どうすんだ？派手な正面突破が？絵になるぜ。
あんた何しに来てるんだ？
あ？
クラウド、一人ぼっちでも平気だったよね。
俺のことそんな風に思ってたのか？
違うの？
平気なわけない。
もっと知りたいな。 クラウドのこと。
あ、時々話そう。
Okay, so in this video, I've gone over translations, both big and small, that affect how a viewer learns about characters in the story. Small examples like Rude or Reno, or big examples like Barrett's flashback and Aerith and Tifa talking in Chapter 5 of Rebirth. I've also gone over and talked about the localization and how, if not carefully done, can make unnecessary changes to both the story and the characters. Again, I point out how Sephiroth is presented in the game along with Cloud. However, a final bit I want to talk about is something I've discovered more and more since starting the research of this video. The more and more I started to compare the English and the Japanese, I've noticed something when it came to the interpersonal relationships having the biggest changes, which moments like these require the most context. Basically what I'm saying is that any big character moments, be it 2 characters, 3 characters, or even 1 character, those are the ones that get the biggest changes for some reason in English, and as a result are not faithful to how the characters are portrayed, especially when you look at the original Japanese script. Don't believe me? Let's look back at Chapter 5 section I talked about, which is then later followed by Chapter 9. Why in English is it changed to sound like 2 high school kids talking about a crush? Zack is way more than a crush to Aerith, as he was the start for her to trust again after what happened to her when she was 13 years old. Followed up with Chapter 9, where she is very direct saying that she still loves him when asked by Cloud. Again, the English either plays this off, or does this typical, I guess, kind of mentality, or they just want to throw in more drama for some love triangle, I guess, which, FYI, it's not actually in the Japanese version. Heck, go back to Chapter 1, where Cloud and Tifa are talking at the end of their side mission. Tifa is in both awe and scared of the open sky and can't stop looking at it. Cloud in Japanese is worried and reminds her not to hurt her neck. This is the real Cloud breaking through as somebody who worries about Tifa, yet in English goes back to that Steel Sky mistranslation at the end of the remake where Aerith makes a comment about it. That part was changed, but in Rebirth it wasn't. What about Barrett, Cloud, and Dyne? Before the fight with Dyne, Barrett says he wants to save Dyne, but then in Japanese, Dyne says, "Your story is a real masterpiece of lies, isn't it, Barrett?" You can also read this as, "What a masterpiece. You can say the funniest things sometimes, Barrett." Then it finishes it with, "Say all you want after you die." Dyne here is ready to off Barrett. English goes with some random lines which don't really match, I guess to maybe potentially show that he's more crazy, but in the Japanese script, Dyne's not as crazy as he's portrayed in English. Then, after the fight, we get Cloud coming up with one of the greatest moments between him and Barrett. In the original script, the Japanese makes a callback to Remake when Barrett told the group that he would shoulder everything after the reactor explosion. If you remember, during that time, a lot of the characters, excluding Cloud, were down and really surprised about what happened, and Barrett said that he would shoulder that responsibility. Cloud in Rebirth here in this scene reminds him of that, again, showing the growth that he was actually paying attention and having those callbacks, and then says that Barrett can count on them to help him through this difficult time. This callback is better at showing their growth and the bond between both Barrett and Cloud. This actually then leads on later to Chapter 12 at the docks, where Barrett does not look down on Cloud like he did all the way back when he first met him.
めんどくせえやつだ。いつぞやの誰かさんを思い出すぜ。Another loner. As if one wasn't enough of a pain in my ass.
How about in Chapters 11 and 12 of Remake when Cloud is speaking with Tifa? In Japanese, he's concerned for her when she's looking down and when she puts herself in danger. However, in English, he comes off honestly pretty rude. I'm not sure why English is doing this. I don't know if this is just how they think English speakers like modern games. We don't play Japanese RPGs because we want a westernized version of this. Going back over to Rebirth for Chapters 11 and 12 in Nibelheim during one of the side quests, Cloud compliments Tifa's piano skills and Tifa says, "I got excited because you were here." Yet in English, has her being all smug saying, "Wow, an actual compliment from you?" Then, after that, Tifa expresses wanting to get to know him more because they only got to know each other when they were young kids in Japanese. Yet English brushes this off as, guess we don't know each other as well as we thought. Players have said Remake and Rebirth are being vague and trying to confuse them. Are you sure about that? I don't know about you, but the Japanese is spelling this out very plain and clear. Not to mention, some of these localization lines and some of the lines in English sound like they're using the OG English script from way back in the 97 game, which again, as we already know, was very rushed when it came to being translated. If you really like doing a lot of the side missions, since those are a lot of character moments for these guys, when you go over to Costa del Sol, when you're in the gym side quest, Cloud and Tifa are talking about their past to get to know each other better due to the 7 years that they haven't seen each other. As you take out enemies and complete the quest, they talk about the food that they like, talking about growing up as kids and more. At the end, Cloud regrets not being able to eat much of Tifa's cooking, while Tifa wishes he could as well. They both regret not being in each other's lives, yet again in English, Tifa is making these backhanded remarks saying, "You snooze, you lose," when both of them wish that they could have been a part of each other's lives more. A major one is all the way back in Remake with Cloud and Aerith. Cloud is leaving to head back to Sector 7 and Aerith follows. He asks why, and in Japanese, she says the exact line that we hear Zack say in Crisis Core, "I want to spend more time with you," obviously being a callback to her first love. But Remake was like, I'm not sick of you. Again, what is this? Teenagers in junior high school? After that, it's followed by them going to the park where Cloud says the same line in Japanese as Zack did, referring to his Mako eyes. But again, in English, it's just like, nope. Can't be referencing Zack. Hopefully you're trying to see this trend when it comes to Zack being involved in this game. English localizers don't seem to like him very much. The final part of this section I want to bring up is when Cloud sees Tifa in the Chocobo carriage and rushes after her. Aerith calls Tifa his Taisetsu no Hito, which means somebody special to him, which, if you remember, is how Cloud has always thought about her since his days as a kid, and especially in 2000 Gil. But nope, English just says, aren't you worried? What if something might happen in there? Now, again, a lot of people are going to try and point out that these are basically the same. However, when your game's story is so tied to relationships between your main characters of any level, regardless of what they are, and you decide to change words, phrases, and the meanings of those words, you are literally hurting the characters and their stories. It's hurting the characterization of them, making them look like one type of person when they're not supposed to look like that, and can lead to players and viewers not understanding certain story points or how characters might act, especially when words are added that are not there in the original script. Heck, even the song sang by Aerith gets caught up in this mistranslation and mislocalization. The writer of the song had to come out and clarify in an interview what the song actually meant, because you had people online posting what they thought it was, but in reality, it wasn't. Heck, one of the translators actually came out and said, yeah, you can't really make it as one-to-one as we wanted, so we did the best that we could. But if you look at this actual article right here, they hired a professional translator. A professional translator, you say? I thought the team at Square was supposed to be that. I'll leave the link below so you can go and check out and read the whole thing if you want. I recommend it. It's an eye-opener. But all of this right here is the main concern when it comes to the English translations. Again, as I've stated since the intro, I know how tough translating something is, but why is it only the English? I have friends who can speak German and French, and they use those subtitles while listening to the Japanese. And they've told me, yeah, no, these are way closer to the original script than what you get in English. And when lines are translated from those languages to English, they match the Japanese script far more than the quote-unquote official English lines. Final Fantasy has always been a simple yet deep story, and a lot of that comes from the relationships built throughout the game. Aerith and Nanaki, Aerith and Zack, especially in Crisis Core, which is before 7, Cloud and pretty much everyone in your party, but you might not know that since the English has changed so much. And why? To make it sound mysterious? To have love triangle dramas? Because someone feels like changing it because they think they know better than the writer? I guess Square doesn't like to check on the English script after it's translated, which is honestly kind of pathetic. Who actually knows at this point? But it's getting old, and it makes me super worried for Part 3. Part 3, for those of you who have not played the original / the second half of the original game, is very story heavy, and that includes all of the relationships between all of the characters, including a new one with Sid and someone important to his story. Heck, the live stream sequence alone is a big character moment. We get real Cloud back. That's what happens. All we've ever wanted is the full story translated from Japanese. If someone gets mad at somebody, show that. If someone shows concern, properly express that. It's not fair to us, the consumers, and it's also not fair to the voice actors who have not been given faithful translations and localizations. Speaking of the voice actors, they do an absolutely amazing job. As someone who grew up with the cringe era of English dub and early anime, it's gotten a lot better. The actors for the main cast of these characters are doing an amazing job. But once a bad translation appears on screen, I know it's not their fault. I don't know if the script translators over there are in the room with them when they're doing these recordings, but I really wish somebody would go in there and oversee this. Also, to any comments saying that I'm attacking translators, pointing something out and having constructive criticism is not attacking somebody. Every single job in the world comes with improving things over time. Obviously, if someone is yelling at somebody, then that's clear hate. But simply saying, hey, next time, let's get this and do this instead, that is not hate. And also, if you mess up enough times in most jobs, you do get let go and somebody is brought in to do the job better than you. And because I know this will probably show up in the comments somewhere in this video, no, the last part of these translations that are connected to relationships are not for shipping. Relationships are a big part of this entire game. I simply want to understand the characters' emotions that are written in the story and the plots. I'm lucky enough to have studied some Japanese and have friends who can help me translate parts that I don't know. But again, this is not fair to ask of those who don't know Japanese and want to play in English. It's pretty obvious in Japanese where the story is going, how characters feel, and their personalities. English, well, not so much, especially if you fell for the marketing in the trailers or some of the interviews over in the West. The whole point of the remake trilogy, as Nojima has said countless times, again, the writer of this game says that there is going to be less room for interpretation so that he can tell his full story, especially with the technology available. Back when it came to the OG, it left a lot of room for player interpretation due to the technical limitations. And I'm not really sure about this, I could be wrong, but because this entire compilation entries have gone a long way towards clearing things up that were previously left up to the player's imagination, I feel like that has upset not only the players that really love the OG, but also some of the people that are working on these localizations. So the big question is, what can we as fans do to let Square know and the teams know that we want proper English translations and localization, just like all the other languages are getting? Well, we can actually click this link right here that you see here on screen. This leads us to a support page for Square and their games. Now, I know it's in Japanese, so in the pinned comment, I've also included a post that you can use that has been read over by both friends and family who are Japanese, and it confirmed it's good constructive criticism and that we want to see better English translations to be directed from the Japanese script. So when you click on the link that you see here on screen, click here and then select this option, and finally you can enter your email address, copy and paste the message if you'd like, and boom, you're done. If you should include more, please be mindful of your Japanese and try not to rely too much on Google Translate and AI. We saw what happened with the remake Ultimania, and yeah, wasn't exactly good. Plus again, we want to be constructive. If you just yell into the void at them, they're not going to reply. So be respectful. As I wrap up this video, there are tons of other examples that I've most likely missed. Some of those off a pretty straight list are Marley when she talks to Cloud in the slums, Tifa in the live stream / the weapon scenes, Barrett's comment about Vincent and Cloud in chapter 12 I mentioned beforehand, Aerith at the very end of the game, Cloud's flashback when in the reactor after Sephiroth goes crazy. Again, there was more Crisis Core callbacks, but they were for some reason omitted, and so on. But we could be here all day by me pointing all this stuff out. The main point again here that I'm trying to get across, we as players and customers of the game deserve to be told the whole story, complete translations, and proper localization. And as I've stated before, that does not mean translating every single character to English where grammar is ignored and the performances don't make sense. What should be expected, though, is proper localization that follows the script that the writer of the game with no personal bias when translating said game. I don't care if there's a purple elephant that is talked about in the Japanese script. If it's there, talk about it. Obviously, through localization, make the English flow well with grammar and such, but that should not be controversial. That should be a standard. That is what I want from all of my games. We want to see the full game as close to the source of the original material. Now, one thing I gotta mention before I go. I want to leave one message for the localization team and for those in charge of the project. First, I simply want to say thank you. Thank you for the last 10 plus years to recreate a beloved game like Final Fantasy VII. It is not an easy task, and it's impossible to please everyone. That being said, to the ones in charge, like Hamaguchi-san and such, please take more extra time to look over the English translations before recording starts. Nojima-san, please make sure your work is properly represented. You chose to have English as a second spoken language in the game. This means a lot of players will choose this option. They deserve to hear the full story written by you, the writer. Some players feel as though that there are two different versions of the story. It's time to have the full story presented and set. We also don't play these games to get some modern day story using slang from 2020. We play the game for the full story that was made in Japan. If something does not work perfectly in English, then adjust, but not to the expense of the story. If something sounds silly, that's okay. We want the closest translations to your work. And my final message is to the localization team. Again, I know how hard it is to translate lines and stories from one language to another, let alone a full game. Languages do not work the same, and sometimes things have to be changed at smaller levels. The work you have done is seen by millions of people, and I'm sure the pressure is crazy. Not to mention thankless. I also know that one mistake does not mean that the full team is at fault. However, with that being said, it is not your job to make changes to the story the writers have given you. This is not your story to change. The writers have trusted you with their work, and to make changes because you feel like it or to add balance is not, I repeat, not your call. Act professional. Subdue your personal opinions about the story and translate it to match the writer's original story points, even if you don't agree. The most important thing you must do when working in this field is to leave out any interpretation of your own personal bias. If there are members on the team who are going around and doing this and think they know better, I say check your ego at the door and do your job. It is your job to show the writer's work in its original format to other audiences, not making changes to fit your opinions. We expect better as customers, and honestly, you should expect better from yourself. It's time to grow up and do better.
クラウド、俺は黒マテリアが欲しい。いわば歴史のターニングポイント。
邪魔するぞと。
そうだ、それでいい。空っぽの心を怒りで満たせ。
Well, that is all I have to say on this matter. This video could easily be 4 or 5 hours long. It took a lot of time when doing the research, triple checking translations, finding clips, doing multiple playthroughs, and so on. Now, I'm sure I probably made a few mistakes myself. If anyone who happens to be watching this is from Japan or you're a native Japanese speaker, please let me know in the comments below. I've always enjoyed the story of Final Fantasy VII, and I simply want what's best for it. I want everyone to be able to experience the full story. Hopefully I was able to get that point across in this video, even if I came off a little strong at some moments. But with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, then a like would be greatly appreciated. It helps push the video more so more people can see it. I've been Tallen with Direct Gaming. I hope to see you in future videos, and if you want to chat with us live, make sure to join us every Friday evening for our live streams. If we're playing something on screen but you want to discuss something else in the world of gaming, feel free to chat at us and we'll have a discussion, no problem. Until next time though, Johnny.